what do you do to prepare for this podcast? Like, I mean, I guess that's a kind of a broad question. Obviously, you know, in during the week, but like specifically, do you have like something that you do before we start?
Nothing.
Okay.
I'm a filmmaker.
I'm a scientist.
And we're two friends who've made movies together.
And launched a company together.
And we lost our money.
And our identity.
But we are finding ourselves again.
And this is our podcast.
This is it.
Welcome.
I'm Thomas Torrey.
I'm Justin Moretto.
Welcome to episode 8 of a podcast that still needs a name.
Still taking suggestions.
But we made 8 of them. It's pretty good.
Are we publishing these yet?
The Academy Awards are coming up, and I can't help but tell everyone about which films really deserve your attention.
Wolfwalkers. Wolfwalkers is the only one that should be on that list.
Justin only gets to watch cartoons these days.
Stay with us.
What'd you do this week? Or how's your week going?
We're not very far into it. It's going well though. Trying to catch up on the movies for you, per your demands. Yeah, what we did this week? Celebrated Rebecca and I's birthdays.
That's right. I knew it was Rebecca's because, you know, the interwebs tells me. But if I thought about it for an extra 2 seconds, I would have remembered you both have, like, you're a day apart, right?
Yeah, mine's the day after hers.
When is your birthday?
Yesterday.
You idiot.
What?
Happy birthday.
Thanks. I'm not a big birthday person.
So you didn't go through the whole day saying, where the hell is Thomas's happy birthday text?
No, because if I thought that, then I would have to feel bad about the fact that like my parents didn't text me.
Oh, jeez.
Right? I mean, or my siblings.
Do you know my birthday?
I do. I mean, I certainly have it on my calendar because I have all my, it's in November, but I have to pull up the actual month.
Justin, happy birthday. I feel like, I feel bad.
November 24th.
Yes.
I have like a G-Cal with everybody's birthday, and then it gives me a 1 week and a 1 day reminder.
My saving grace with all my friends' birthdays is my wife, because Amanda has a superpower.
My wife.
Amanda has a superpower where she knows everybody's birthdays. If she hears a birthday once, she'll remember it. She's got this crazy memory palace that only really works for birthdays. But 100% of the time, she will see like, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday. Make sure you wish him a happy birthday. I'm like, oh, thank God. So I'll text my friend. And I'm 100% sure she obviously knows your and Rebecca's birthdays because every year she'll be like, hey, it's Justin's birthday. Hey, it's Rebecca's birthday. This year, for obvious reasons, it probably didn't cross her mind because, you know, she's going through cancer treatment. But she let me down because she didn't tell me yesterday, hey, it's Justin's birthday. Because I would have texted you first thing and I would have been like, boom.
Boom. Gotcha.
Proof that I'm your friend.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't. So now I feel guilty.
That's all right.
I see your eyes. The listeners can't see you, but I see you. And I see the pain. The
tears.
Coming up right now, we dive into the best movies of 2020.
According to the experts, Thomas Torrey.
And Justin gets a little testy about one of my picks. It's a good conversation. You won't want to miss it.
Soul? You didn't make your list?
Nope. Don't make me dump on Pixar again.
Okay.
So, in honor of the Academy Awards, which are Sunday, April 25th, I wanted to talk about the best films of 2020. Or, put another way, my favorite films of 2020. Because as a film nerd, I have been ranking films, this is for 10 years now. I think 2011 was my first formal best of favorite films ranking. Once I feel like I've seen enough of the films, now every year there are always blind spots. There are always films that I haven't caught up with that are in the conversation. Some that I likely might really enjoy. There's just not enough time in the day to catch up with them all. So I will note the films that I haven't seen. But I am excited about kind of talking about the best films of 2020. Before we do that, I wanted to quickly look at what the best picture nominees were for the Oscars. It might even be fun to compare it. I'm sort of springing this on us, but comparing it to the Independent Spirit Awards best film nominees, because pretty consistently for the last few years, all of my films all of my favorite films have aligned very nicely with the Independent Spirit Awards and have not really aligned with the Academy Awards. And they're obviously different organizations, different voting bodies, but one tends to champion more popular films and the other more independent films. So it's worth noting kind of what the Great Academy and the Independent Spirit Awards have sort of deemed as the best films of 2020. And then after that, we can sort of go through the films that we liked the most. Okay, so here are the Best Picture nominees from the Academy Awards for 2020. These are films that came out in 2020 in some way, shape, or form. The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, Mank, Minari, Nomadland, Promising Young Woman, Sound of Metal, Trial of the Chicago 7. So I have seen, of this list, Trial of Chicago 7, Sound of Metal, Promising Young Woman, Nomadland, Minari, Mank, sort of. If you recall, I talked about seeing Mank and was bored, so I turned it off. I have not seen The Father or Judas and the Black Messiah. So apologies to those films, and apologies to Mank. I blame Netflix for enabling my boredom and allowing me to turn it off without following it through. I'm only half kidding because I could have finished it. But yeah, Mank, I enjoyed. For whatever reason, I wasn't loving, and I just turned it off. And it's now like the most nominated film. So maybe I go back and watch it, or maybe I was right. Maybe I was just bored, and it's a good film, but it's not for me. All right, let's look at the 2021 Film Independent Spirit Award nominations for Best Feature. First Cow, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Minari, Never Rarely Sometimes Always, Nomadland. So I have seen all of those, and all except Never Rarely Sometimes Always made my list. Never Rarely Sometimes Always, I appreciated it. I wanted a lot more from it. It wasn't concerned with giving me more. It was very much a small, contained sort of slice of life moment. But it didn't quite land for me, but I appreciated it. But it didn't make my list. The others I really responded to, and they've made my list. So we'll talk about them. A film that is in the John Cassavetes Award is nominated, which is basically the best feature made for under $500,000. There's a few films in there, but the one that I really love that we'll talk about is The Killing of Two Lovers, which was nominated for the Cassavetes Award for the Independent Spirit Awards, which is a very small film. Very few people saw it, but it premiered at Sundance, and so it's great that it got this nomination.
Best film of the year from my perspective, Wolfwalkers.
There you go. That's what I want to hear.
Wolfwalkers, best film of the year. Incredible, animated, but it doesn't. To me, I make no differentiation. I don't care.
Wolfwalkers is getting a best animated feature nomination from the Oscars.
Is it really?
It is. It's there alongside Soul.
Your favorite?
Soul's probably the front runner, but Wolfwalkers, and we watched it. We really enjoyed it. Wolfwalkers would probably make my top 20.
Wolfwalkers should beat Soul 100%. Like, I love Tina. She's my girl. Wolfwalkers was a better film.
I agree.
Better story, 100%. Better execution. I love was Wolfwalkers. Did I not make that one of my?
You did, and we watched it as a result of your recommendation.
Oh, well, that's so sweet.
Yeah, I didn't tell you that I watched that.
What are some? It's funny. I think I watch more animated films per year. My son's really into Shaun the Sheep. We watched the new one that came out, Shaun the Sheep, Shaunageddon or Farmageddon or something like that.
Oh, right. That's really nominated as well.
Is it really?
Yeah. So you're up with all the best animated features for the Oscars. All right, 10. This movie, 10, Bad Education. This was, I think it premiered at Toronto and then it went on HBO. So it didn't have a theatrical run, and it was like, it kind of came out over a year ago, early in the year. So it's sort of been forgotten about. This is a true story about Hugh Jackman plays a district school supervisor who ends up stealing millions of dollars from his district. And it's just a really funny but serious film. They just strike this really interesting balance of tone. Great performances all around, and a really interesting sort of a student ends up uncovering what has happened in like the school newspaper. And it's a really interesting character study on Hugh Jackman's character, which is a really lovable guy who's sort of doing this horrible thing. And also it's a comment on sort of the class system in this public school that's sort of surrounded in this affluent area, and how much the pressures on him to kind of maintain a certain pedigree of the school because it affects, these rich people in their communities. And it's just a really great film. And it was one, I saw a long time ago early in the year, and it sort of stuck with me, and it ended up on the list.
It's funny. I think it's okay for me to talk about this at this point. You can cut it out if you want. But my first interest in film, I watched the movie Pi, and I was in high school, and I joined the broadcasting. I signed up for broadcasting class, and then joined the broadcasting club. We did the morning announcements, where we essentially took the song Roll Out from like 2001, Roll Out. And we just cut that one portion, the Roll Out portion, because it was so popular at the time and I was so tired of hearing it. So we took that and we looped it for 6 minutes and we made a video and set to that. And I think it made a lot of people really mad, and because we played it during the morning announcements. So anyway, we got slapped on the wrist and our teacher said, okay, you have to do a real story now. So we said, okay, fine. And what we decided to do was we were going to investigate why the girls basketball coach at our school drove, like an Escalade or something, right? Like he didn't actually even teach. His only job was he was a coach. And he was, we did a little digging and, found out that his wife didn't work. And he had no thing that we could find out why he was independently wealthy or anything like that. And then we found out that he actually was in the same fraternity as our principal. And then I noticed, wait, our principal drives a really nice car too. And I know principals make an okay amount of money, but like, do they make that much money? And his wife drives a really nice car, and they both live in really nice houses. And so we started like pulling this thread and like started to ask questions about like, so who does the accounting for the girls basketball team? I was also on the tennis team. I was like, I'm looking at how much money is set aside for athletics for our school every year. And I see the girls basketball team is very well equipped, which makes sense. They are our best team. I was like, but we don't even have money for new tennis balls. We literally have to buy our own tennis balls. Where's all of the rest of this funding going? And so we kept asking questions and videotaping, and we interviewed the principal. And then one day, we got in a lot of trouble, and where we were told we had to stop filming, and they like took away our tapes, and that was the end of that.
Bro, that is this movie, except
is it really?
It goes all the way to the FBI and like a whole, circuit of just fraud and embezzlement gets brought down, and it made national news. But that is this movie.
That's crazy.
All right, number 9, Nomadland. Frances McDormand stars as sort of a woman who's does transient work, and she doesn't have a house, but she sort of lives out of her van. But it's very much showcasing this movement of nomads, as they're called, that people who live out of RVs and will sort of travel around the Midwest and find work. Ultimately, it's about kind of her coming to terms with her husband's death. But it's beautifully shot, directed by Chloe Zhao, who also has a Best Director nomination for her. And her hand in this film is really strong. And it's a really beautiful, elegant film. And there's a couple well-known actors, but it's mostly just cast with real people kind of playing versions of themselves. And it's a real feat of sort of story. And as it's a simple film and, beautiful, the whole thing feels like it's shot at magic hour, which it just looks beautiful. But it's a good film, powerful film. Number 8, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So this is a well-known play by August Wilson, adapted into a film starring Chadwick Boseman and Viola Davis, about a blues band, and Ma Rainey is sort of the matron of this blues band, and Chadwick Boseman's the trumpet player. It's very much about the Black experience in Chicago, but in urban America in that time, the 30s, 40s, and it's very much a play in that it's a lot of dialogue in a couple enclosed spaces. Viola Davis, you can give her the Oscar now. Her performance is pretty incredible. And I said it before. I mean, August Wilson has taught me more about the Black experience in America than a lot of other, pieces of art or films I've seen. There's just, I was just talking about this, about why representation is so important. It's not just so that people can sort of see themselves on the screen. It's so the rest of us who have seen ourselves for years are introduced to other communities, other points of view, other times, other eras by these filmmakers, because it creates empathy in me. It teaches me something. And August Wilson has done that. A lot of amazing Black filmmakers have done that, specifically with the Black experience. But August Wilson, most recently this year, along with the number 7 film right by it, One Night in Miami, which is a similar, which is directed by Regina King and sort of about 4 real life black icons of America, but Malcolm X, Jim Brown, Sam Cooke, and Muhammad Ali in sort of this one fictionalized night where they're together. So those 2 films were just really impactful for me. And I thought they were just really beautifully acted, beautifully directed, beautifully written films. What were your thoughts about them?
Well, I guess since it's first on, the lower one on the list, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, I will start with that one. And I will say that I hated it. Here's my main issue. So what I will say is that I did look up after the fact. I didn't know it was a play ahead of time. To me, it was like, it felt like, a chamber piece. And to me, that was leading me in a different direction, right? It was like, what is it about this place that, why can't they escape it? And so to me, I was like looking for some sort of some importance about what was keeping them in this place, when really it was a function of the fact that it was a play, right? And so I was a little disappointed by that fact. I mean, it felt like somebody said, let's take every black trope for a black character in a film pre-1960. And I'm being arbitrary there, right? But like pre-blaxploitation in the kind of what I think of as blaxploitation, and my definition could be wrong. Let's pick take each of those tropes and let's embody them in one character and let's make a movie about them and let's trap them together. And
are you specifically talking about the Chadwick Boseman character?
I'm talking about literally every character in that band represents to me a different trope of a black person in a film, even down to the fact that there are only 2 women, right? Because there are only 2 female tropes for black women in my view before 1960, right? There was the angry black woman and there was the over-sexualized black woman. And that's the only 2 that exist in this film. And then for men, there were more, but they're none of them good, right? There's like the sort of the wise, black, older black man who's like a gentleman, and he says yes sir and he tips his hat to you. And then there's the sort of the wild, reefer madness black guy who's like, you gotta make sure you lock your doors because he's coming for your women, which was Chadwick Boseman, right? And then you've got like the old sort of disgruntled, grizzled old black man, and that was the piano player, right? And then so you have each of these different like characterizations, and to me, it's almost more important when you do a period piece that you break those tropes, right? Because essentially what it felt like they'd done is they went back and they looked at film from that time, and instead of like considering that people were more dynamic than that, even though they were only represented in these handful of ways, they just shot them as they had been previously represented in film. I didn't really have an issue with the fact that it was so chambery. It let me down a little bit in that I was expecting some kind of prestige. But honestly, I thought it was the door, and I still don't, even if I knew it was a play, I don't understand what the point of the door in the basement room was. I cannot figure it out.
Well, I think from there, maybe the conclusion I drew in the moment, which was, he's preoccupied with what's next, and as sort of part of the jazz musician, there's this talk of like, we want to sort of escape the confines of our subculture and sort of rise above. And there's this idea that, the bleakness of, will we even able to do that? And the door represents sort of progress in the future. He opens it and it's just sort of this empty room, almost like a prison. And the final shot of the film is this white band doing slick versions of these songs, which I feel like the perspective of the film is that,
which they stole from that kid.
Chadwick Boseman. like this music was born out of the black experience, and Ma Rainey became a very well-known and famous matriarch of this black experience within the movie, and that's why she was popular. But ultimately, it was all just sort of hijacked and sort of given to to a white band and a white community, and it's sort of there's a bleakness to that.
To me, that is an interesting story. What you just encapsulated, right? But that's not what this movie is about. That's what that last shot was about.
I disagree. That theme was present for the film entirely through me, and I definitely think Ma Rainey as a character very much is this sort of the angry black woman trope. What really transcended it for me was I mean, Viola Davis's performance I felt was very, authentic and lived in, but there was one line that really cut through where she's like demanding her Coca-Cola and she knows she's being a diva, right? It's like the original diva black woman. And she's basically she's so aware that you are using me because I can give you this music. And basically there's almost an implication. It's like, I'm still playing the slave in a certain aspect to you. And it's like, if I don't hold out for the things that I want and I don't, demand these things, and that's, make her be this sort of the angry black woman, they'll just keep sort of sucking her dry. So it almost like, and which was part of why it created that place of empathy, was that first time that I felt like I was shown like, oh, the root of that angry black woman was sort of someone who, it's like, if I don't demand what I want and it's as simple as a Coke, then I know you're just going to keep sort of sucking me dry. I'm just going to keep playing the slave. And that was a really compelling sort of thing to kind of wrestle with. And
but to me, and maybe we're getting down to like razor thin, margins of semantics here, but what you just described is a different theme, because that theme is a theme of standing up to exploitation, right? Which in my opinion is different than appropriation. So they were not those two white dudes. They were not appropriating her music, her style, anything like that. They were exploiting it, right? They were selling it as produced by her.
Right.
So she did it. It was her creativity, and they were certainly making more money off of it than her. And so she was standing up and saying, no, I will not accept that. I will not continue to be exploited. That's not true. And I think this is something that continues today. And it's true for everybody, but I think it's much more for, people of color, is you have to decide how much you're going to let people exploit you. Everybody is exploited to a certain extent. And what she was saying was, this is as far as you can exploit me, and I will take the rest. The rest is for me. This is what you're allowed to have. And to me, that is different than it was also a form of exploitation when they would take these young kids' songs and like, oh, wow, $100. Thanks, sir. And then they would go and they would sell, they would have Elvis do the song, and then It would make, millions of dollars. But that is more to me about, and all Buddy Holly, all of those people, that's about appropriation, which is a different story than exploitation. I mean, it is a subgenre of exploitation, but hers was not being, appropriated.
Yeah, no. And I guess for me, both of those themes were sort of evident. And I think, with Chadwick Boseman's character, I mean, so much of his story was in recalling the abuse and murder of his father. Like, he lived through very much sort of the real ramifications of slavery, where his father was, horrifically murdered by, racist white people. And
but I think it was really more about his mom. That was the really gut wrenching story, was the part about his mom.
Yeah.
His dad then, who went back, he went after those people, and then, he got half of them and then died. But yeah, that was a very compelling.
And for him, the culmination of that sort of hatred, I mean, it just, the cycle was that he ended up murdering. All his dreams and all of his sort of hopes, just get flushed out because of that sort of cycle of hate and violence. And so I think clearly the film is interested in sort of all of those things.
Yeah,
maybe
to me that it just falls into another trope of like, of a broken black man can't rise above. I wish it was more about like the story of the band, right? And not this one vignette. Like if it had like followed them, and we had watched these relationships. And it was like, this would have been a good scene in a film. This one thing would have been interesting, but I don't know. That's just me. I did watch Ma Rainey's Black Bottom with a black woman, and she felt the same way as I did. And I just say that because, I did have somebody that I kind of like, we talked about it back and forth immediately after watching it, because we were both confused. And I was like, maybe there's some perspective to be had here. But if anything, she made me appreciate things less about it. So anyway, that's all I'll say.
One Night in Miami.
One Night in Miami. I will say it, like, that kind of film is not typically my jam. For One Night in Miami, I don't typically like films where I feel like there is not really any action, right? There's not like, there are very few events. It's mostly a bunch of people talking about things that are happening.
Yeah.
To me, this like very much what Ma Rainey's Black Bottom was. and that's what this was. For this, I thought it was impeccably written, and every single performance was excellent. Each character was interesting and dynamic and were very different. I think that they all existed outside of, because I mean, like you said, these are all four of these men they're based on real historical figures
and well known.
Yeah, and famous men, black men from that time in history, and so they have a certain cachet, a certain reputation, right? And I think that they all existed within that, but they were not constrained by it. There were parts of it where you would see them, like humanity peeking outside of like the way that they've been presented on screen or the way that their public persona was. And I was like, I appreciate that. The writer, and Regina King is amazing, and I love her. I was first became familiar with her, well, all the way back in the, what was it, Poetic Justice or something days. But when I really first, met her was in one of my favorite shows of all time, The Leftovers, which I think I recommended to you 5 years ago and you never watched because you're a dingus. But it's fantastic. I think she's in season 2 and 3. But she did an excellent job. But just, I don't know if I don't know if I would say this is like my best film of 2020, but it's hard for me to like find fault with it, I would say. There were some lines in there that like, it felt like somebody, I don't know, I don't want to say punch in the gut, but it was just like, they hit me right between the eyes. Like it was so well written, delivered, like the cinematic timing was great. I mean, there was the one line, and I can't remember, unfortunately, how it came, that, the wording, I'm going to butcher, but it was essentially the concept of, I will take the blatant on its face racism over this sort of hidden, like tip my cap to you, and then put a hood on kind of racism. And it was said by the singer, and he just did it. He did so well, like during their whole argument. I mean, I don't know. They did a great job. And I feel like the sort of the final moment of it, I mean, it made me cry. That final moment with that song,
Change
song which I love.
Yeah,
a song which I've always loved, and I don't know how much of the story behind that is true. I mean, I know it said based on true events. Like, were these guys really friends? Was there really like a meeting, and they're just sort of extrapolating what happened? But like the story behind it was beautiful, and then its execution of that song in that moment after this film, I felt like it raised it, for me to the top of my list, maybe the top of my list of your list, maybe.
That's great to hear. Yeah, no, I had the same reaction, with the ending when he sort of sings that song. Yeah, Sam Cooke, Malcolm X dynamic, that was my favorite of the four, those two, when they went at it. It was so rich.
I mean, they seemed like they fought like brothers.
Oh, man. And Malcolm X pushing him, playing him the Bob Dylan song. And he's just like, why is a white man writing that song? You need to be writing a song like that. And Sam Cooke's like, he's like coming at it from the other angle. He's like, let me keep writing the kind of the superficial pop stuff, and I'm going to become a man of influence. But of course, he ends up writing Change Gonna Come, which is...
Well, but then what I loved is I feel like that response... Oh, sorry, I just bumped my mic. His response to Malcolm X in that moment, that to me was the obvious response, right? Based on who his character was.
Yeah.
The thing that was not obvious was later when he was talking to Muhammad Ali, and he said, I was mad when I heard that Bob Dylan song.
Yeah.
And because I should have written that song.
Yeah.
And he was honest about the fact that he was wrong. Now, he wasn't honest to Malcolm about it.
Yeah.
But to me, that's what made that character so good, is like, that is the part that he wouldn't, I mean, that's not the part that he wants to publicize. That's like the part,
yeah,
but it was true to me. Like, that was truth in a very different way than the other truth that I feel like his argument was legitimate, but then the truth behind it was also very real.
And in some ways, I mean, it appeals to my sense of dialogue theater. I mean, it's four men with long dialogue. This would work equally as well on the stage because of its sort of constraints. And I really responded to it that way. And out of the four, I really thought Malcolm X and Sam Cooke they just lit it up. They stole their dialogue. They stole the scenes. And I'm glad to hear glad to hear you enjoyed it like I did. I think everything you said was well said and right on. All right, don't go anywhere. Our discussion continues right now of the best movies of 2020, according to me.
And fear not, Thomas and I agree about the top 2 movies. No more fighting.
No more fighting, just loving. And Justin remembers that one horrible movie we saw together where he literally guessed the twist within the opening credits of the movie.
And I'm going to tell you, under no circumstances should you watch that film. Please, please.
It is fun to watch and hate on, but we shouldn't do that. 6, Minari, a beautiful film written and directed by Lee Isaac Chung, loosely based on his own life. A Korean family moving into Arkansas, farmland Arkansas in the 80s, about this family just trying to start a farm. Thought it was a beautiful film, beautifully shot, beautifully acted. It's getting a lot of accolades. Stephen Yeun, who's a Korean American, playing this Korean man. The kids were great. The grandmother kind of steals the show when she comes in from Korea to help the family. And it's just a really great distillation of kind of the family dynamic and what it means to sort of have a dream, to press on, to be an immigrant. It's a great, beautiful film. Number 5, The Trial of Chicago 7. This film might probably deserve to be a little lower on the list, but I love Aaron Sorkin, and I'm a sucker for courtroom drama. So when you get Aaron Sorkin writing a courtroom drama, it kind of is going to get bonus points, but I really just ate up the dialogue. I ate up the dynamics. It really goes a little melodramatic at the ending, and its main flaw is this sort of silly kind of coda that the film goes, that I think a stronger director, because Aaron Sorkin directed his own film, it's only his second film he's directed, a stronger director would have shied away from a little bit of the melodrama, a little bit of the sentimentality, but you can't fault his amazing dialogue, the cast he assembled, and for something that, was obviously startlingly relevant when it was made, but even more so after we've sort of had a riot in our government only in the last few months, and how this film is very much about it could have equally been sort of about things that we're seeing today. And this was, of course, about the famous trial of the Chicago 7 back in the 60s. Number 4, First Cow, written and directed by Kelly Reichardt, starring John Magaro and Orion Lee. This is set in Oregon pioneer era. Basically, in this settlement, are the first to get a cow. Like, this rich man gets a cow, so the first cow that comes to this early pioneer settlement in Oregon, and John Magaro plays a cook who sort of travels with, fur trappers around, and he lands in this settlement, and he steals the milk from this cow and makes essentially donuts. They call them like milk cakes or butter cakes or something. And they're just, people start buying them. And it's a very simple, quiet film about the relationship of these two men who sort of team up. One is this Chinese immigrant, and the other is this American cook. It's about their sort of enterprise, them trying to forge a way for themselves. It's about this time, and it's just a really quiet, simple, lovely film. I like Kelly Reichardt. She makes these very quiet neorealism kind of films, and she's made a few period films, Meek's Cut Off being one and First Cow being the other. But there's a simplicity in her storytelling that really draws me, and the performances from these two guys it's just really fresh and kind of like a palate cleanser. It's something that not a lot of, many might find boring or they might not be into, although I watched it with my wife and daughter, and they were both into it because the story dynamics were enough to kind of keep them invested, and you feel a great sense of suspense when he's getting the milk and, he might get caught. But it's interested in things that are a little more universal than that. And it's really interesting because the scene opens with, in present day, this girl's walking her dog and she comes upon the skull of, these two bodies, and then it goes back 200 years to their story. And it's just really interesting to kind of cap the film with this modern idea, which I think is plays into what it's interested in talking about, with sort of just enterprise and maybe capitalism, or just maybe just sort of trying to find your way in America, in a country that's still very new. Great little film. Number 3, Killing of Two Lovers. Definitely a film I want to champion. It was a very small film that premiered at Sundance 2020. Like I said before, it was nominated for the Cassavetes Award, which are films made under $500,000. This film was made for $32,000, starring Clayne Crawford and directed by Robert McCoyan. I don't know how you pronounce his name, but it's 12-day shoot, very simple. They shot it in Utah. Handful of characters, handful of locations. It's the kind of film that I've been trying to make, and there's a lot of parallels with All the Names We Buried. You have a few characters, a few locations, and it opens with this guy pointing a gun at his sleeping wife and her lover laying next to him, and it's just this striking opening image, and he's clearly, the cuckold of the relationship, and he can't go through with it, and he escapes the house undetected, and then it's about the following week where he's trying to just... He and his wife are separated, so they're living in separate houses, but they haven't fully figured out if they're going to divorce. But there's this new guy that she's clearly sleeping with. And it's just this really striking dynamic. The performances are perfect, and it really goes into a really unique place that I wasn't expecting. The filmmakers talk about the toxic masculinity being a theme they wanted to explore, and when these two men confront each other, the husband who's not quite an ex-husband who still loves his wife, and then boyfriend who's like, inserting himself into the dynamic. It's really interesting, super simple, super compelling, but just one of my favorite films of the year. Can't recommend it enough. The Killing of Two Lovers.
Yeah, not at the moment. Not a great way to see that for anybody. There's not an easy option.
I know, it is not yet released to the world. I saw it because I got a screener from it for the Independent Spirit Awards, but it clearly has some release schedule that is, I guess, in the next few months. All right, number 2, The Assistant, starring Julia Garner. Sort of about the day in the life of an assistant in a film, a film production. It's clearly something like a Miramax film in New York City, where a Harvey Weinstein surrogate is sort of the top dog. You never see him, you never hear him, you never hear his name. He's just sort of this monster that kind of lurks, but he's clearly abusing women, and this assistant is not the subject of his sexual advances, but she sort of is just there witnessing it, and there's a lot of dynamics at play, her own sort of crushed dreams of wanting to be a film producer, working her way up, and what she spends most of her time doing is just dealing with this horrific boss, but it's also kind of about the environment that kind of enabled the Harvey Weinstein type until, thankfully, he was undone. I really loved it for its simplicity. I thought Julia Garner was incredible. I thought it was shot very beautifully. It's just a very clean, strong looking film, strong shot film, and this sort of day in the life. And it just has this poetic sort of ending where this girl, you could just feel her dreams being crushed for the Hollywood that she's wanting to come into, that she had this is all unsaid, but I was projecting this idea of like these rosy ideas, going to move to New York, going to become a movie producer, working an assistant. And, her boss is raping women in his office. I mean, which is what actually happened with people like Harvey Weinstein. And, unlike any other film, when I just provoked me to this place of prayer and I just ended it, I'm just like, man, let me be a force for good in this industry. Let me be someone who shines light and not darkness. Because you see a character like this Harvey Weinstein type and is such an agent of darkness in this industry, which is just filled with people bringing darkness. And I was just like, let me be a person who brings light. And it just really pulled that out of me and provoked that, really inspired that in me. And that was a really strong reaction. What was your reaction?
Yeah, I really liked it. Actually, did you recognize anybody in this film?
Matthew McFadden, Succession.
No.
Who else?
You're not going to.
Perva Betty.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yes,
you got it. Okay,
of course.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
46-minute mark.
Yes.
Yeah. I heard the voice and I was like, what? Wait, whose voice is that? I was like, I know that voice. And then like for a brief moment shows her and she's like so professional and good look. And and then I was like, oh, it's Perva.
So yes, so our wonderful Maggie Kochar from Minor Premise, played by Porva Betty, a great New York City actress, shows up in this film. And of course, I'm not on a personal connection with her, but Safia, who played his son, I shot him a text and was like, oh my gosh, I love seeing Porva there.
I actually started to text you and I was like, no, I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it for the podcast. But yeah, so this film, I thought it was it was an excellent concept, and I thought it was well executed. I found it was a very quiet film per unit volume. She had way less dialogue than a lead typically does.
Sure.
Right? She just did not speak very much. And I feel like most of the film was about her being talked at.
Yeah.
Right? Either talked at or talked about, or like
it was her just absorbing the world around her. And
so it was but I feel like it's such a different kind of take on it, because it was like her attempting to exist in a world that was hostile towards her. And even
the two male assistants who would just
because they saw themselves as on the trajectory of the boss. And so to him, she was a consumable resource, right? Because in the industry, that's what women are, right? They are a consumable resource. Whereas men, they're a renewable resource. They, we're going to grind them down. We're going to consume them. If they survive, we're going to keep reusing them, and they're going to grow and get big. But women, they are there for our consumption. And that, to me, was captured very well in this film. I feel like a lot of other films, or a different writer or filmmaker, they may have empowered that character, and we would have heard a lot more from her. We would have heard her complaining to her friends. She would have been out, lashing out by partying. Any number of things, right? But she didn't even clearly her dad helped her get this job. And she did so she wasn't even comfortable complaining to her parents about how bad this felt. And the scene with the HR person was so deeply troubling.
Yeah.
But so deeply real.
Yeah.
And so anyway, to me, that is why this was such a great film, is that it captured, and I'm not a woman, and so I can't say for certain, but I feel like the experience of women that is most real is being forced to exist in an environment that is hostile towards you, knowing that you cannot, lashing out in any way will jeopardize that. And, speaking up for yourself and all of these things. And that is changing a lot in many different areas. Obviously it's not fixed, but I just thought they did a really good job of capturing that in a way that I've not seen before.
It's a great document of our time. It's a great, it's a kind of film that was made out of the time we're in, and it's a great, in 20 years we look back at films that kind of capture the moment. It's a great example of that. And I love what you even said about just kind of thinking about the different ways this character could have gone if it was obviously written and directed by a man, or even a different kind of woman, or an older woman. Kitty Green wrote and directed it. She's not as young as the Garner character, but she's a young woman. She's in her mid-30s now. She was probably, who knows, could have been late 20s or early 30s when she wrote it. So I think what we're responding to about it, and the choices that you're pinpointing that you responded to, are very much not just because this particular woman wrote and directed it, or not just because a woman wrote and directed a woman's story, but this particular woman who has her own sort of life and experiences. So yeah, it would be interesting to consider if it was sort of an older woman or obviously a man. And great film. Glad you liked it. Now my number one, and I should say my top three, Killing of Two Lovers, Assistant, and now Sound of Metal is my number one. I honestly could, either one of them could be my number one. They're very interchangeable. Ranking a list is ranking art is ultimately very silly. We kind of do it only because I like to, not because it needs to be done. But there's no real reason why one of these should be above another. But Sound of Metal was one that I equally had a strong visceral reaction to, that I had somewhat of a spiritual experience with. And then over the following months, it sort of stayed with me. I found myself recommending it to people very consistently. And so that's sort of why it ended up at number one. But The Assistant and Killing of Two Lovers, I love equally as much. Sound of Metal is up for all the awards, including Best Picture. And it stars Riz Ahmed as a heavy metal drummer who starts to go deaf. But more than that, he's a recovering addict. So there's this very small, sort of specific worldview and then community that he goes to for a deaf community for recovering addicts. And it's ultimately about him coming to terms with his ailment and finding peace within himself. The film is very much about finding stillness, and finding peace, finding a sense of just presentness and not trying to outrun your problems or chase them down, and Paul Raci plays sort of this counselor at this deaf camp.
And he was fantastic.
He is fantastic. He is sweeping. So he's up for Best Supporting Actor. He is winning it all because
really?
You see that, you watch that film, you're like, this is not an actor performing. I'm seeing a human being. And it's it was the perfect alchemy of a scripted role that they were looking at like Robert Duvall for. And it's a scripted role that Paul Raci's agent found it. And Paul Raci's a no-name actor, and he's a hearing man, but his parents were deaf, so he grew up and he's fluent in sign language. And so they were like, his agent knew that Paul Raci was perfect for this role, so he chased down the filmmakers and sent him the tape. And of course he was, and he ended up getting cast, and now he's probably going to win Best Supporting Actor because it's just so real, so authentic, and it's the perfect marriage of content, script, and then actor to portray it. You can't imagine anyone else in that role. And it's a beautiful film. And, when he talks about challenging Riz Ahmed's character to be still and, all the stuff going on in his head, which is very much about him losing his hearing, but also the tendencies of sort of an addict in recovery, when he's like, just write it all down, just get all that noise out on the paper until you can find stillness. And then if you find stillness, sit there and be there. And if the noise comes back, just keep writing. And later in the film, when he's challenging Riz Ahmed, who's trying to, outrun his ailment by getting the cochlear implants, he's like, I wonder if you ever found stillness. Like, were you ever able to get there? Because he's like, that is where the kingdom of God is. And Riz Ahmed was not able to get there. I mean, he's never kind of found that stillness until the end. It's very much about him finding that peace and that stillness. It's not a spiritual film. That's one of the few spiritual lines of it, but I certainly connected to it as a spiritual person, but also someone who is constantly trying to find stillness and peace when my mind's going a mile a minute, when I feel like life can be out of control, when I can be trying to chase down ambition. I find my own stillness and peace in that quiet place. So it was just a beautiful reminder to me of that. That's a big reason why I connected with it so specifically, because I'm not an addict, I'm not going deaf, but I can relate to sort of trying to outrun the noise in your head and really needing to kind of come to a place of stillness and acceptance. Really loved it. How'd you react to it?
I loved it. I thought it was really well done in all of the ways that you've described. It was also not what I was expecting.
You thought it'd be like a loud movie. It's a very quiet movie.
Well, so let me also tell you something that I did to watch this movie that I feel like changed the experience for me quite a bit. I watched it with noise cancellating, high definition headphones.
Interesting.
And
the sound design is very specific.
It is. And I don't know if they intended for it to be watched this way or what, but it made the experience like incredible, because there are moments in the film where it goes from being a loud, noisy scene to absolute silence. And it's something that I feel like you don't get. And I didn't do this on purpose. It was just like, it was functional for me.
That's awesome.
Because I wanted to listen to it with the volume up, and the kids were sleeping. And so then like, you hear this busy chatter, and then all of a sudden it's like zip, nothing, just dead air. And it like, I don't know, just had that effect on me that was really strong. But and this is kind of a lesser point that is more personal to me that, probably didn't affect you in the same way, is that I really appreciated the way, the portrayal of metal in this film, because heavy metal has such metal. Metal is such a big category.
Yeah.
Like there's, speed metal and black metal and death metal and grindcore. I mean, there are all these different kinds of metal, right? And I mean, it's even worth pointing out that like, a lot of people, maybe people who listen to this podcast, they have a very specific opinion of a band called 9 Inch Nails, and it's heavy metal, even though it's more like industrial metal, whatever. But they have an idea of what that is. What is it? It's bad. It's like, evil. There's all kinds of like devil worshiping, all that kind of stuff, which there certainly is in the world of metal that does exist. The fact that the way that they showed metal, they represented metal, the diversity of the metal. Because that first song, most people will be like, this isn't metal. This is like something else. But it's, part of the metal genre. But also just like he was super neurotic and he had all these crazy things, right? But he was like clearly a hard worker.
Yeah.
I mean, he was talented and all of these things, like even despite the drug addiction, maybe being a trope, I think that is something that just exists in the world of music. It almost felt like him being in a metal band and losing his hearing was just a device, right? Like they needed him a reason to make the loss of the hearing high stakes. And so it was important, but then it was really like about this like tumbling loss of control. You and I have had this conversation, and it came up a lot for me during the filming of and subsequent watching of Fair. I had never realized before being involved in Fair how important audio is in a film medium. More important, in my opinion, than the video, which is so counterintuitive. But if you watch Fair, the film works despite difficulty with focus because of what was going on. I mean, the way it was shot, the constant cycling in light, not a, I don't, did RC even have a way to rack focus? I don't think he did.
No. Unless he was hand holding it.
But, and Jeff, who did the sound, like he worked miracles because that film would not have worked without the audio.
Yeah.
Like it was okay that things were out of focus, but if the sound was bad, it would have been throw it in the trash can.
Yeah.
And I just had never really realized that before, that the audio is more important than the video, which, may sound, like heresy, but that was what I discovered. And the sound design in this film was just so good. And the way that they depicted hearing loss was excellent. One of the things that I really honestly struggled with as somebody who is not in any way, differently abled, maybe except for, some of my, mental foibles, is the struggle of like, if I were to lose my hearing, would I want to fix it?
Yeah.
And my uncle is deaf, and I have a cousin who early in his life he dated a deaf woman, and then it was like once he got into that culture, it was like he was plugged into it, and so he's kind of always dated and then married a deaf woman, and so my exposure to it is not super firsthand, but I have some, and I know a little bit of sign language, and so I'm somewhat familiar with it. But it's like I do struggle with that. Obviously, we don't have any people who are deaf listening to our podcast probably. But the idea of like, if I were deaf and there were a way to fix that, despite like the way they portray it in the film, would I chase that the way that he does? And I want, the acceptance versus repair is like, it's tough because, it's in the same way that we're not supposed to say that people are disabled anymore because it forces our perspective of what is normal upon them. And I think that that's powerful that, these people can communicate. They don't have the sense in the same way that we do, but they don't want to be considered disabled, right? They are just abled in a different way. I can't sign the way that they can. I can't communicate with my hands the way that they can. So does that make me disabled? Anyway, but I feel like that is a hard question to answer. Would you chase that fix, to repair your body? But then also that is a really hard scene. I wasn't sure if he was going to tell him or not.
Yeah.
And I think this says a lot about me is I thought he was going to keep it a secret because that's what I would have done. I probably would have gotten the surgery. I would have stayed there for my convalescence. I would have kept the hat on and I would not have told anybody.
Yeah.
But I think that just says something about me, but he doesn't. He tells him. And then the guy's like very emotional, rightly so. He responds very much in the way that I thought he would, which is why I would have kept it secret, which is that he's like, you're telling everyone else here that they are broken.
Yeah.
That you see this as being broken. And therefore you got fixed, but they are still broken.
Yeah.
And I cannot have that here because we do not consider ourselves broken. I'm paraphrasing. It's more well written than that. But that's tough.
Yeah.
Well, one last thing that I'm curious that it brought up a question for me that I'm really curious about. I think that the film ended perfectly. I don't mean like of all time it's the most perfect ending. What I mean is for this film, it had the perfect ending that it could have had.
Yeah.
I try to imagine different versions of the ending. So, my mind is constantly extrapolating. How is this going to end? How is this going to end? I can't help myself. Right. I would have felt very unsatisfied if they had gotten together, like made it work.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I can't answer. I thought about it and I can't figure out why. Is it better him getting his hearing fixed was probably a bad choice. And like him throwing everything at this relationship that ended up not working out, he shouldn't have done this. He should have, like, he did it. Maybe it's because it makes me feel better about my own choices, my own mistakes in life. It mirrors reality more, which then doesn't like hurt my brain as much. I don't know.
I think because I do a similar thing, trying to think. I think about where a film's going to go, but I'm also always trying to figure out, like, well, what is it? What is it saying? What does it mean? Kind of, sussing out the theme. And usually the richest films, I don't have a clear idea of what it means, what it's saying till the very end. And I responded very strongly to that scene early on where he's talking about, like, hey, I wonder if you ever found that place of stillness. That's the kingdom of God. And it's the same scene where he's saying, you can't be here because you being here is sending the message that everyone else is broken. But it's not till that final scene that you realize what it's about. And it's about him finding stillness and peace. Peace in his own head, peace in his acceptance of who he is. And that's not just about the hearing loss. That was something that predated it, because we know all this backstory of the little bit that we get. As a recovering addict, he's always trying to outrun himself, and he doesn't feel in control, doesn't feel that peace. So I think the best films, we think about the different endings because we're grasping at what it ultimately means. Is it about him and his music? Is it about him and his girl? Like a good film, it's about all those things to a degree, but you're not fully sure until the ending. And the ending is sort of the final declaration of, here is ultimately what this movie's about. And I feel like Sound of Metal is ultimately about Ruben finding stillness, finding peace. And because, and we respond to it, if it's good, by kind of breathing, yes, of course, that is what it's about. Hopefully you kind of have a sense, and then the ending really drives home what it is. And it feels inevitable. It feels paid off. It feels satisfying. But if it went a different direction and it was about ultimately the girl or the music, I don't think it would have landed as well, because I think we intuitively knew those were sort of symptoms of this deeper sort of issue, and the film's concerned about this deeper thing. And I think it smartly sort of teases it throughout and then brings it to a strong final sort of statement at the very end. But it's only into that final scene that we really know, this is what the movie's about. This is what it's ultimately putting out there in the universe for us to enjoy. And because it was handled really well, we didn't see it coming, and then it feels so kind of right and inevitable. And hopefully that's what all great endings do.
That is a very good answer, because it rings very true. And I will say, for that, I love, for me, a film that I don't know really what it's about till the end is the best, but only if it then makes sense in retrospect. And it almost feels like, there is this scale, like the earlier in a film that I realize how it's going to end, the less I like it.
Yeah.
And so the longer they can postpone that, the more I'm going to like it. And that's not a metric that I've ever stated explicitly before this moment, but I'm realizing it at this moment. Which is funny, because, the film that is maybe the worst film that I've ever watched of all time, I watched with you. And if you will remember, maybe before the title card came up, I guessed correctly the ending of the film. And I was so angry the entire time. And once it was revealed, I was like, I cannot believe I was right. Do you remember what that was?
I remember this. I don't remember the film.
It's your boy, M. Night Shyamalan.
Okay. I was going to say, it sounds like an M. Night
The Happening.
Film. Oh, that's right. Oh, God. That was a terrible movie. You totally called it.
You're like, shot of the trees in the park, and the wind blows. I was like, it's going to be the trees.
It's the trees.
I literally said those words. And then an hour in, I turned to you and I said, I think it's actually the trees.
Oh, my God. What a train wreck of a movie. That's hilarious. I totally remember that. We watched it in my, I feel like we watched it in New York. Oh, was it New York? I thought it was at my townhouse in Charlotte. When you
could have been.
You visit?
Yeah,
anyway, but David Mamet has a great definition of a good ending: surprising yet inevitable. And I've heard him say it. I assume he wrote it. Maybe he didn't write that, but it's a great sort of.
I think he copied it from this podcast.
Probably did. It could have been Poetics by Aristotle. Who knows? Aristotle probably wrote something similar. All right, that is the best films of 2020, at least according to us.
That was a lot. We spent a lot of time.
All right, there you have it, everyone. Man, we packed a lot into this episode.
And Thomas left a whole lot on the editing room floor, like how he didn't like Promising Young Woman and left me to hate on Ma Rainey all by myself.
Well, we'll put that on the DVD extras.
Are we recording the video here?
Let's hit our 2 picks, Rex, super quick. Justin, you got one for us?
Heavy metal. I'm going to say heavy metal. Everybody thinks they know what it is. Nobody really does unless you listen to it. And neuroscience says it's good for your brain. It's catharsis. Look up the research. Go find some heavy metal. Car Bomb. I'm talking about Cult of Luna. You know, some stuff that's not what you expect. 9 Inch Nails, obviously. Downward Spiral might be a little bit too heavy for people, so go with the Fragile.
And keeping it in line with our episode, I want to throw a rec out to the 2 Best Picture nominees that I haven't seen yet, A Father and Judas and the Black Messiah. Go see them, because I haven't. And also Killing of Two Lovers, which is not available yet, but when it is, please watch it. It's a super tiny film, and more people need to see it. Killing of Two Lovers. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. Please help us grow our audience by subscribing to this podcast wherever you listen to yours.
If you want to stay connected to us throughout the month, which I can't imagine why you wouldn't, you can follow us on our Instagram account at TwoFriendsPod.
I know the Instagram account is a little lacking, but, you know, give us ideas for, like, content, because we can't just have pictures of me and Justin all the time, because we live 3 hours apart. TwoFriendsWithAPodcast.com is our website. Go there. There will be footnotes from this episode, links to where you can watch these movies, and you can even email us there. Hey at twofriendswithapodcast.com. That's how you get in touch with us.
Yeah, email us. Tell us how wrong we are about all of our movie reviews. And Thomas, if they want to see your film work and leave excellent reviews for you, where can they do that?
ThomasStory.com is a good way to get in touch with me and see some of the films I've worked on. Yeah, watch my films. And if you're offended by some of my likes or dislikes, feel free to hate on my movies. And Justin, if people want to follow our company, Bad Theology, where can they go?
BadTheologyPictures.com, as
and
always.
on Instagram, at Bad Theology.
Yeah, they can do that too.
We'll be dropping regular episodes. In a couple weeks is our next. We got a good interview in the works. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening.
Love you. Boutros, golly.